Okay, so January meeting, Southampton Village Planning Commission. So Mark, there was a meeting with the Clean Water Committee, and maybe you want to talk a little bit about that, and I think we wanted to talk a little bit tonight about sort of what's been happening in the village. There was a meeting last week. The Southampton Press had a session about Lake Agawam, and then tomorrow there's a meeting at the Southampton Arts Center sponsored by the Lake Agawam Conservancy about good practices for landscaping. There's a lot happening, but maybe you can sort of give us a little summary.
Right, so we had a meeting with the Clean Water Committee. It was a very productive meeting. We had, there was a lot of good suggestions that were made in terms of improvements on the lake, from and many, we can also speak about the various systems that were being considered, from wetlands, from adding some buffer zones to, and this is being done in conjunction and in collaboration with the Lake Agawam Conservancy. So that's so, and we also discussed the implementation of a sewer system for the village. And I understand that Pio Lombardo, who was at the event there, has proposed a cluster system. Where there is also a study for a more centralized system. So I think that a lot of progress is being made. I think that we hopefully should see something happening in the very near future.
Right. So let me maybe add a few things, and then Rob, if you want to sort of talk a little bit about it. So the Clean Water Committee, which has been really working to assemble and put together sort of a summary and review of all of the efforts that are being made, has put together, sort of an update of the management plan that was done, I think, originally in 2018 or 2017, maybe the first one.
Maybe early. There was
Maybe
one back in
earlier.
2009, and then I think an update
Right.
in 2017.
Right, updated 2017. And, I guess the first point is that through various village administrations, there have been a number of steps taken. There have been catch water basins put in throughout the village. There's been improvements to drainage. There's been the Lake Agawam Conservancy was originally its predecessor was organized back in 2009. They've started to change practices around the lake. So a number of good things have happened, but the problems can continue to grow and get worse. And as we were saying before the meeting, we're trying to sort of undo 150 years of history here. Right. Of drainage into the lake, so it's not going to happen overnight. So they put together a summary, which had, in summary form, I would say about 30 items.
This is the Conservancy or the committee?
I'm sorry, the Clean Water Committee, which had about 30 items of sort of major sort of buckets of things that are under, some of which are underway, some of which have been completed, and many of which have yet to be done. I think there's a lot of interest right now in various technologies, including the cluster system and potentially the use of the cluster system to deal with some immediate issues.
Right. And also the study was about the dredging.
Right.
It's really worth looking further into the possibility to dredge the lake.
Right.
I think Tom Luthen had made some research, and he found out that in the 60s they had indeed dredged the lake and took out approximately 10,000 cubic yards of material. So, and apparently it was successful. It was a good operation. I think that it's something that we should definitely study more. The report was discussing about possibly taking out 65,000 cubic yards, of which I personally think it's a little excessive, but I think that some dredging would definitely have a very, very positive impact. There was also a discussion that we had about the release of the water into the ocean. There is a pipe right now that's is being used, and every so often the village public works department opens the valve and let it flush out a little bit in the ocean. What comes out is
Noxious?
noxious,
Yeah.
to say the least. So we need to study more whether
Right.
there's a positive aspect or not.
Right.
And there was a comparison with Nicox Bay, where there was a breach in the last storm, and it really cleaned up substantially
Right, right.
Nicox Bay. So whether this could be also
Yeah, but the breeze means water is also coming in.
Right,
Yes.
right,
That's the
what,
difference.
right, that is definitely part of the difference.
Yes, Lake Agawam is basically fed through an underground spring.
Yeah. It's almost like a closed water system. Things
Yeah.
come in
Yes.
and then there's no way for it to get out.
That's it.
There's no
Right.
circulation.
Right, right,
But
correct.
even if it gets out, it's just what comes in.
Right, right,
Yes.
right.
It's not fresh water from the ocean.
Right.
I think it's important to recognize also that all these things that we're discussing will be done under the auspices of a public-private partnership. So
Correct,
that's-
yes, yeah, which is a very good point. So, the Lake Agawam Conservancy, which is getting more active, is a very important point. Also, I want to sort of, the mayor and trustees have been very entrepreneurial, particularly the last year, of reaching out to the state and the county. The dredging project that the state funded this time, for example. That's a very important step for us because it's not a problem we're going to be able to solve on our own. So that's also starting to happen. So, so let me go back to history a little bit and talk about our role, and then maybe, Rob, you can talk about what the Clean Water Committee's been working on. So, back in 2012, I believe, we started to look at what was happening in the village center. And under Mayor Eppley, we commissioned a study of the village center, really on the concept that before we addressed sewer or other wastewater management problems in the village, we had to be able to show that there was a limit on development in the village and a structure of development. That was done, the zoning was changed, and in 2014, I believe it or not, we worked with H2M on putting together a study of a potential sewer district and plan. And that study showed, sort of gave a basic guide of what the potential need was. And showed how a centralized system could work. It showed a cost of around $30 million at the time, some of which would be funded with grid grants from other municipalities. There was a decision made at the time not to move ahead, and we sort of put it on the shelf. And we've been doing a lot of other work in the meanwhile. So, obviously there's a different focus now in the last year on this issue, both because of the problems in the lake, and obviously also, there's a tremendous focus in the village on the issues having to do with, long-term retail and entertainment health of the village center itself.
And the ability to have wet uses
Right.
as part of the
Right, which is
retail.
extremely limited right now. So that's something that the Clean Water Committee has been working on, and the trustees have been working on it. And going forward, I think our key role is going to be to help with the sort of legislative side of that, if you will, which is, for example, whether or not ultimately the right technology is a cluster technology or a centralized plant, or any other or any other mix of technologies. Under any of those circumstances, we need to create a sewer district, correct, because that's going to allow us to make this work long term. So I think part of our role here is going to be to sort of address sort of the things that are going to take more time, and also need to be done from a regulatory point of view. So as these things are worked out, there are ways to enforce them. I think the other thing that sort of out there to think about is, Well, at this point, we're working on, obviously, everyone's being encouraged voluntarily to change the way lawns and other things are being maintained. You have to assume at some point that's not going to be voluntary. And again, that's where we come in our traditional role, which is to look at what regulatory things are going to need to be done to make that work.
Well, there was discussion at the press group.
Yeah.
They did say that maybe we can make it a condition upon the bill of sale, if you have an old system, you have to upgrade your septic systems, or that
Right.
there was some.
Isn't that
Yeah, but
happening
There
now?
was some discussion.
Yeah, I think so, but for the fertilizers, I thought I heard that cannot be
That's state,
regulated.
that's state.
Yeah,
The
so
state
the
can.
state, yeah, well,
Or the
not even-
county?
but something about the federal.
It's both, but it's mostly the state. Can you hear me, Charlie? Sorry. It's mostly the state. There is an exception to it, which is that counties can declare public health emergencies.
Right.
That's
Oh,
for temporary suspension of the use of certain products.
Uh-huh.
that's
They
not,
negotiate that with the state, but at the end of the day, they have the ability to do that. It's a pretty
Right.
high bar
Right.
to do
right.
that. Otherwise, it's basically state legislation, and the agricultural lobby in New York State, because of upstate agriculture, has been very strong.
Right.
And the chemical companies have very good lobbyists, both
Right.
at the state and the
Right.
federal level.
Right.
So it's a challenge.
Absolutely true.
it really has to be voluntary, but
Any
legally
agricultural,
you can't do anything.
any agricultural pesticides are really, in New York State, the regulations are almost non-existent. There's very little regulations, there's very,
Mark, when
it's a real issue.
if someone gets a building permit for a new house now, don't they have to put in an enhanced?
Only in certain
Septic.
areas.
Only in specific areas, when you are a certain distance from
The water table?
no, water body,
Oh, from water body.
from a body. If you are within a certain distance of any water body, including Lake Agawam, you
Right.
would need to have to put an enhanced water system.
Right. But that could be expanded, obviously.
Yes.
This could be expanded on.
Right.
Shouldn't.
Right. So, Rob, do you want to mention some of the work
Sure.
you're doing?
Yeah.
And introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Rob Coburn, resident of the village, and I serve on either the vice chair or the co-chair, to be determined by the town, the village board of the Clean Water Committee. So just to echo a few things, you're right about a management plan for Agawam. We also have a one-pager to sort of help frame and crystallize and present in a simplified form what the challenges and potential solutions are. I would just, in mentioning those, say that, I want to make it clear, Agawam is not the be-all and end-all. It's getting a lot of attention for understandable reasons. It's very visible. There's some good momentum behind it, but the Clean Water Committee very clearly sees that the practices and the plans that go into Agawam will be a template for Old Town Pond and the other bodies of water, with some differences in the biology and the chemistry for the estuarial waters of Hetty Creek, and even for the groundwaters. That are the mandate here is comprehensive. To your point about septic, Paul, I think the Clean Water Committee sees septic obviously as a big issue with respect to water quality, but in terms of the potential solutions, we want to play a role in coordinating, we want to absorb information, pass along anything we learn, but for the time being in this stage of planning, we see that entirely in your court, and then together, mostly with your lead on septic, there'll be a recommendation made to the trustees, certain things along the way. I just want to comment on planning, which makes some people's eyes cross. But one of the good things about having a comprehensive plan for Lake Agawam, for the village, water bodies, and then for groundwaters and septic sanitary flows and everything overall, the more we can wrap this all into a larger plan. And there's an efficiency horizon. You don't want to take forever doing that. But the larger that plan is and the more comprehensive it is, you begin getting benefits in terms of simplifying the SEQRA review process. It sounds more complicated, but actually if you've been thoughtful about putting it all together, it can simplify it. Certainly, you may have to do 3 times the work that you would for any one application, but you won't have to do 20 applications for SEQRA. And that then opens the village up to some larger funding opportunities. Some of the really big checks that have been written by the state in particular to municipalities to upgrade sewer systems or install sewer systems have come as a result of a very large comprehensive plan that has gone through a full comprehensive secret process.
Right.
So, with the urgency of time behind us, and we may have to pick off certain projects here and there, one of the goals here is for us as a Clean Water Committee to recommend to the trustees the adoption of a comprehensive plan that would then give some better support. Within the last week, we've sent a number of recommendations on to the trustees to act on. Some of them are very procedural. The two I would point out are, number one, we have recommended an educational forum. There's a lot of groups doing these, but we would like to do one aimed at residents to help frame out what is causing the problem and what are some of the potential solutions, and then maybe a second portion that's focused really on very specific behaviors and techniques and resources for homeowners. So that's something that we've asked the trustees to basically give us permission to go ahead and plan, and we'd come back to you guys for some input on that as well. The other one, which actually is going to come in the form of a letter tomorrow to the trustees, is a budget recommendation. Paul and Mark, you both had some input on this, but this is not actually a question of whether the money will or won't be available. The trustees have the means in some capital budgeting processes and in trustees' special projects, and they've shown the willingness in the past to fund projects like this that are necessary. So it won't actually, at this point, impact the amount of money. It's a question of trying to highlight within the budgeting process the need and the focus on water quality. So we're going to deliver a letter recommending a certain amount of money be set aside or be earmarked within trustees' special budget for, it's the soft costs and the planning and engineering and legal expenses necessary to frame out water quality solutions. That's going to come tomorrow. Just with respect to dredging, there is a draft dredging study done by Nelson Pope Voorhees in consultation with Gary Gillespie, and that's not been finalized yet. And it only covers the northern about 35% of Lake Agawam, but it's a mapping of sediments, where they are, what their depths are, what the sediment depths are, soft and hard sediments, and some characterization, some initial testing as to what's in those sediments. It's a fascinating map to me. There's some conclusions about the feasibility of dredging overall, which we've heard a little bit about. But to me, one of the most fascinating things about it is that the hard sediments and the deepest sediments in the lake are basically immediately downgrade from the Bend and Pond Lane to the west and Linden Lane to the east. Both of those are areas that are anticipated to get bioswales. And one of the things that illustrates is that that's where a lot of material, both inert and substantive material, but almost certainly organic material and other contaminants, are coming into the lake from those direct downgrade drainages. So the bioswales, just to illustrate why they're important, some of the contaminants that come down will get taken up and incorporated by the plants that live there. But it really allows an area for those sediments to collect physically. There'll be a need to maintain and remove those sediments over time, but to have an opportunity to capture them on land and deal with them on land before they get into the lake. The other thing I would say is that there is a meeting, I think it's next Friday, the 24th, with the DEC. This is a second meeting and a follow-up meeting to have by the village to have discussions on, some large-scale solutions in Agawam that require a DEC approval. There is a focus, I think, on dredging to begin with, but maybe some other discussions as well. And I would just put in for the record, because someone mentioned the concept of direct ocean dumping, very controversial, some bad optics to it. There was a consensus among sort of the three people on the panel last Friday at the press event that when it's done at the right time of year, when the sea temperatures are low and when marine life is very low seasonally, that it can be done relatively safely. And interestingly, one of the people advocating that it be considered, not advocating that it be done, but it should be studied, was Kevin McAllister, who told me privately afterwards, I've spent most of my career fighting against things that look like this, and even proposals very much like this. And it basically said when he's lost those fights and seen things go forward, he's seen them actually be effective with relatively little impact. So, we should all reserve judgment. I reserve judgment. It's something that I think we would recommend. We need to understand the science on. Chris Gobler has said that ocean dumping is a disaster and that toxins don't go away. So we need to get a meeting of the mind scientifically to determine whether that's acceptable. I guess
It's important to understand that the village regularly does it right now. that
Yes.
the village regularly.
Not of sediments,
But
but
at
you're
a
right.
much smaller scale.
Yeah, it's much smaller scale, but
Yes,
still there's a
correct.
discharge.
And that's done, the only purpose of that's not to flush or try to reduce the toxins.
Right.
It's done for water level regulation.
Exactly.
After big rainstorms or
Right.
long wet
Exactly.
periods, it's just
Yeah.
done to regulate the level of
Yeah,
the lake.
yeah.
I guess the only thing I'd want to say, and people have alluded to as well, but, obviously, Mayor Warren is very much
Right.
on this topic,
Right.
and you mentioned some of the entrepreneurialism of the
Right.
village. I think a lot of that energy comes from him, and it's
Right.
been, in my opinion, great. Trustee Allen's doing a
Right.
lot of work. She
Right.
is the liaison to our committee,
Right.
and was at the event last Friday. And, it's just worth putting on the record that Gary Gillespie,
Yep.
I think he mentioned something to me a couple of
Right.
years ago, if I remember correctly, that he, didn't know too much about water quality, knew a lot about water management, but
Right.
not water quality. As a village resident and getting to know him both personally and through this process,
Right.
he's a real asset to the village in terms of open-mindedness and, and sequencing and prioritizing and thinking about how to use his budget, even in small ways,
Right.
to address water quality now. So it's a real
Yeah, and
asset
he's
to
been an
have.
amazingly quick student,
Yes.
learning very fast.
Yep.
Yeah.
And an interesting
Yeah.
point that you mentioned is this educational session that the Clean Water Committee would like to put
Right,
together.
right,
And I think, Planning Commission should
right.
get
It
involved.
would help to make
Absolutely,
that
yeah.
work, yeah.
Yeah, to help, you were thinking what, in May?
Yes, I think May, it was somewhere late May, May
It's going to need something like
20th
the
or
Art
so.
Center, a big enough venue, because as you
Yes.
saw last week, there's tremendous interest there.
There's interest, and I would just make a
Right.
personal comment, but I've shared this with other people, and they agree that, there are stages of awareness of
Right.
this issue, and it's a bit of a bell curve, as
Right.
most things are in
Right.
life. And I think we're still at the point where, with all of the work that you and other people are
Right.
doing, and more people becoming aware, I still think there's 2/3, and maybe even 3/4 of the population that is only vaguely aware
Right,
of
right.
the severity of the issue.
Right.
And most of those wouldn't know, as that man didn't until the session last Friday, that they are part of the problem.
Right, right.
And so what I would love to do is have some smaller test cases, but at some point encourage the village to try to think of a true sort of town meeting
Right.
type forum where we get not dozens or 50 or 100 people,
Right.
but maybe where we get 1,000 or more people. I know that's ambitious, but to me,
Right.
it would be helpful to try to aim toward that kind of event. Because the sad fact is that, most people don't realize, and I think people spend a number of years pointing fingers at who is
Right.
causing the problem. It's the
Right.
people on the lake, it's the
Right.
businesses on Job's Lane,
Right,
and the
right.
answer is it's all of us.
Someone else's problem.
It's the technology that we've had installed for the last
Right.
100 or more years,
Right.
and it's the practices we've been using with that technology.
Right.
And so, even just the awareness of that
Right.
is a breakthrough.
Right.
So.
Thank you.
And Mark's been great in liaison work with our committee. It's been very helpful, and we'll come back and make periodic reports. It's been underscored to us as I think we're in a similar boat to you, but a rung or two below on the ladder of hierarchy, but we're just advisory to the trustees.
Right, right.
So our goal right now, we've had some formation activities, but it's really to gather information,
Yep.
try to organize it,
Right.
try to synthesize a little bit, and then make recommendations
Right.
to you on an interim
Right.
basis before it goes to the trustees, or in
Right.
some cases directly to the
Right.
trustees.
I think part of what we're going to start to do is look at things like creating the sewer district that take time and get those started. So, I think we've been told many times by many different people, you're probably looking at a 2 to 3 year time frame from now to the point that the sewer district becomes effective. And so we want to start that as quickly as we can, because there's no way around that. There's a whole hearing process and applying to the county and everything else.
Regardless of what you choose, it's
Right, you're going to end up there. I think also, and Rob, the way you frame it is very helpful. I think the thought that this is a problem that everyone has, and therefore everyone's going to need to contribute is very important. I think when we started on this issue, I think a lot of people thought, well, it's just those businesses on Job's Lane or Main Street, why aren't they paying for it? People on Main Street and Job's Lane said it's just those people on the lake, why aren't they paying for it? There was really a sort of sense that it was a much smaller issue than it is.
Well, I think it's important to recognize also that between 2014 and now, the county has really recognized the issue, and it really also has adopted the technology that it was reluctant to in the past. So I think that's very important to recognize that there is available tech out there that was not available in 2014.
Yep.
Also that, really in the last 10 years or 15 years, I mean, we've seen a real change in the water level, in the environment.
Right.
Right.
I mean, there's been more and more issues with rising sea levels, more hurricanes, more dramatic events. So,
And as Trustee Allen keeps pointing out, climate change is really having an impact that we're really beginning to see, like the fact that the lake doesn't freeze anymore,
exactly.
which really has an impact on water quality long term. The birds are here year round, where it used to be in the winter they were mostly gone. I mean, there's lots of things happening that we got to assume are going to be the case from now on.
Absolutely.
It's just
I mean, this algae bloom
Right.
is also it's a problem that it's not only just in Southampton. It's globally.
Yeah.
There is as you said, it doesn't freeze anymore, so the bacteria are still there, feeding them in the winter.
Right.
Has definitely an impact.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And coming back to us, also the other mandate we have from the mayor is, addressing the wastewater issue, which is related, but just a very small piece of the Lake Agawam issue.
Yeah.
And that's something we really need to address because, I think we're all very conscious of what's happening in the village, the need to really make it a better environment for small businesses.
Are we going to
more
have a
viable.
presentation for a PO or is that not?
Not tonight, but yes, we are. We are.
'Cause I do believe the trustees are very interested at least weighing their options. So,
Yep. So that's clearly part of our mandate at this point.
Yes.
That's very important. Again, one of those other global changes that's happening is with the change in retail. When it may be in the 98 when a lot of stores closed because the economy changed, it was like, we were like, well, we're going to ride this and they'll come back.
Yes.
We're in a really different place now.
Like Mark, I've been the quasi-liaison to the business committee, and they have done a lot of good things. They've involved Discover Long Island to do some marketing. They've done a lot of social media, Instagram. So they have been trying to drum up interest online also. And there's a lot of ideas floating around marketing-wise, so I think Eldon will also be involved in that because that's his forte professionally.
Yep.
So some good things are happening on that front as well.
Yep.
So I think that between also there are some major projects coming in Long Island, like we have the hospital coming, which is like over $350 million project.
Right.
Then we have the accelerator at Stony Brook, which is a 1.5 or $1.3 billion project. So there's going to be a lot of economic activity in this area in the next few years. So we need to
It just depends on what kind of shape it's going to take.
We need to plan for it.
Yeah.
Right.
And if I could just make another quick comment, because what you said about, maybe 10 years ago, people said, the business, the downtown is failing, or 5 years ago, we need a sewer system, and the business owner should pay for it. They should pay their share. But, one of the, I would say maybe in the converse, I went to a training program for Suffolk County Village Officials Association back in November, I think it was. And they had presentations from 5 mayors from Nassau and Suffolk County who were either mostly complete or partway into a business and downtown revitalization project.
Right.
And what all of them said, the 2 big takeaways I had were, one, you just have to stay open to the one idea or catalyst that could change the dynamic, because each of them would say, looking back, something unexpected happened. Someone came with a proposal that seemed off the wall. They followed it. So that was interesting. But I think the other one was that it's getting the right retail mix, having residents also who live downtown helped all. But this retail mix in today's environment means experiential uses. It means hospitality use, food and beverage uses that require that wet use. So that's the interconnection, which is until we can solve that problem, we don't have the tools available to do what most people have done, most villages have done in revitalizing.
Well, the issue is
really
also
critical.
that it's lost in the we do have over 24 wet uses in the village now. That may be a small number, but there's wet uses that are not being used. So to say that that there's places there close for winter to see that there's nothing available. It's the people need to come first before we have.
Right, there's a many things you need
Yes,
to do.
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, one, I guess, we've talked about a few of them here, parking management, which is a
yes.
big issue in this village. And I think also, like, the other thing that we've just started to, and again, the mayor's been very active in starting, is one of the great resources we have here is cultural resources.
Right.
Much more than probably for our scale, any other village on Long Island. We have Southampton Art Center, Southampton Cultural Center, Southampton History Museum, art galleries. We have a real wealth of cultural resources. We have Peter Marino is going to do a new
Gallery.
museum here. So that's something that properly used can be a real generator of economic activity.
If it all works together.
Yeah, if it all works together cohesively, which I think we're just starting on. The other thing I wanted to mention was Eldon has been, I think everyone knows, but he's been working on the potential enhancements for the historic code in the historic district. He had a workshop which he invited a representative of the State Historic Preservation Office to come down and make recommendations. Some of which were fairly easy and quick to implement, some of which were more long-term to implement, and which should certainly include sort of improving both the current code, but also the process that applicants could go through at this point. So he is working on that. We talked about it at the last meeting. He's going to be very focused in the next few months, along with members of the ARB and other boards, is starting to look at how those could be implemented,
And I think,
which is a very important step for this village.
and I think that the building department has also, in my view, improved substantially, because there has been in the past, where demolition permits were really granted solely with the building department without proper review by the ERB. So I think that there is more of a tendency from the building department now to require approval from the different boards, which is a big improvement.
The only issue I've heard from the public, speaking is a code enforcement. They want to see more code enforcement.
Correct.
That's not really our purview, but if we could make that part of the whole process.
Right. And the trustees, as I think most of you know, have been focusing also on buildings that are not occupied and their upkeep. And
Yes,
issues.
storefront,
Yeah.
And I know they're also flirting with the idea. I know there was a big issue, the idea of doing a vacancy tax. It hasn't been discussed publicly, but I think that's an issue. That's good. May come to the forefront.
Right. Yeah. And then let me go back to something we worked on a year ago, and I think now come full circle is going to be the third initiative for this year, and that is. I think we have a tendency to work on things too early. So about a year and a half ago, we started to look at the potential move of Southampton Hospital and what that would mean for the village and addressing the zoning code. Again, we got to the point of interviewing a number of firms. We picked a firm. That did not go forward at the time. Suffice it to say that you have to be not reading, talking, or seeing anything at this point, not to know that the hospital is going through the initial steps of making the move. They've hired architects. They've started a fundraising campaign. There are plans underway. The Stony Brook University has been advancing those plans. So clearly, the hospital is going to be moving. I don't think there's any doubt left whatsoever. That's going to be both a major issue for us in the business district because they are by far the largest employer in the village. And so when you take all those jobs and move them to the college campus, it's going to have a real impact. Secondly, it's a great opportunity because it's really a opportunity to look at what the village is going to look like in the future and how we address the needs we have. And third, it's something that I believe very strongly, if we don't take the initiative, the private sector will. The hospital will inevitably at some point sell the site. And if we haven't done anything beforehand, that person or that group will be really driving the conversation, which is, to me at least, not the right way from a planning point of view to
But I think it's important, as we focused on last year, to figure out the underlying zoning of that problem.
Right, exactly. So we have now begun, we're now getting a lot of inquiries from the property owners on Old Town Road, the people who own the medical buildings and other buildings along there, who now have suddenly thinking about what happens to them 3 to 5 years down the road when the hospital moves, and they're assuming that much of that activity will move also. And so they've been calling and saying, so what are you doing? What's the zoning going to be? Like, what are we going to do when that happens? So I think there's, like many of the things we work on, the awareness is rising, and that's, I think, something we're going to return to and try to walk through, as we have in other zoning issues, a planning process to begin to look at that.
Have you spoken to the mayor about following up with James Lehman?
I think we will be,
Okay.
yeah. So just want to mention that because the hospital has, taken a number of, they've they've made a tremendous amount of progress since last summer in moving that forward.
Yeah, they selected the architect. and
Right.
They're in the process of selecting the engineers.
Right. They have the development, the financial development process underway.
Couple considerations.
Yeah.
I heard that the people that work at the hospital don't really shop much in the village center anyway, so if the hospital moves, probably won't have a big impact, or they may come anyway. And as far as these medical buildings, the doctor offices are, I think that'd be a great opportunity to make townhouses out of them.
Right, well, that's one possibility,
Have
for
some-
sure.
have
Right.
some
But that's not really possible under the current zoning?
No, of course
Right,
not.
right. Right,
But those are
right,
they're already ready. All they have to do is
Right.
modify them a little bit, and
right,
you've got
right,
Affordable housing.
Right.
workforce housing right there.
right. Yeah.
Anyway.
I agree. And that's part of the study, is also to understand how much shopping or making use of services are they doing now?
Yeah, really not that much. I don't remember who told me that, or somebody from the hospital, whatever, but they felt that, they're not going to shop that much, maybe food, maybe to buy some lunches and things,
Exactly.
Right.
but not much more than that.
I think when you take, several hundred jobs out of a village of this size, my guess is people are going to be surprised,
Yes.
particularly in the winter. Not so much in the summer, obviously.
But they're still near the village. Where are they going to go? If they have to go and buy lunch, they're still going to come.
We'll go to the
same
highway.
places.
Go to the highway.
They're going to be close.
I think you'll see a lot of stuff open along the highway.
Yes.
That's really my guess of what's going to happen, because, you get right onto to 39, and
Right.
there's those little shopping centers, most of which are fairly vacant or low grade. I think you'll see sandwich shops and cleaners. And all this. Yeah.
All goods have to expand.
I'll give you an example. My guess is the cleaners are going to be stunned when the hospital closed. They have no idea that a lot of their customers are people from there. They have no idea. And they're going to say, where did everyone go? I'm serious. I think that's what often happens. People don't think about it because it doesn't occur to them that the people who are coming in at 4 o'clock or first thing in the morning are someone who works
How
nearby.
many people are employed at the hospital? Do you know?
1,000, I think.
Yeah,
1,000.
yeah.
At the hospital, I think it's about 1,800 when you include.
Yeah, yeah.
1,600 when
Yeah,
you
yeah.
include across the street.
That's a lot of customers.
That's a lot of people in a village of this size.
And they also have, 500 or more visitors a
Right,
day
right,
coming
right.
as patients or family members, so
Right.
it's a big.
Right, who then run to the bank or run to the cleaners or run to, grab a sandwich or whatever it is. Go to the health food store, whatever. I think I just think we need to be a little proactive. One of the things we talked about, as you know, when we were first talking about this, is it's also, that's a lot of space, and it's opportunity to rethink a little bit what the job base is out here going forward. And, they've been working obviously on the co-working space. But, you know, things like that, going forward, how we create a job base that's durable here. So that's our agenda for 2020.
May I make a comment on the second item? I'm
Yep.
sorry. So again, it's Rob Coburn. I just wanted to mention that I've had some discussions, a couple emails with Paul, but also some discussions with Eldon
Right.
on the sort of updating the code, not only for the historic district,
Right.
but possibly for the village overall,
Yep.
updating code and processes and
Right.
guidelines. It's sort of three goals that Eldon and I have discussed. Improving the clarity of expectations. What are the expectations the village has for
Right.
preservation and for land use, and what are the expectations that applicants and homeowners
Right.
have,
Right.
and trying to clarify those. Strengthening the code possibly, simplifying and strengthening the
Right.
code,
Right.
both simplifying and maybe upgrading the code in
Right.
certain
Right.
ways,
Right.
but also addressing the user-friendliness of the
Right.
forms and the process, and some better education for people. A couple things to mention. It's such a small thing, but the ARB voted on our meeting on Monday. We put in place a new sign application process. It's just a small little
Right.
flea on the
Right.
dog of zoning, but the idea was to make it a little more user-friendly and quicker and more
Right.
responsive in the majority of cases. Not
Right.
every case, but the majority of
Right.
cases. And also at our last ARB meeting, we opened up a dialogue on historic resources and whether we should be more proactive about landmarking individual properties,
Right, right.
revisiting some of the properties that have blue sheets and were inventoried in 1979 but
Right.
not included ultimately in the
Right.
historic district. Whether we should be, so landmarking some of those or expanding the historic district. Zach Studenroth, the village historian, also brought up the concept of some kind of historic overlay in some or all of the village potentially, where certain historic factors, it wouldn't be a full designation, it
Right.
wouldn't require certificates of appropriateness, but it could give some further oversight to the building department
Right.
and/or the board under certain circumstances to review a demolition permit or other factors. Eldon had asked me, based on the meeting that he and I had, informal, it was just a liaison meeting sort of, but to put together sort of a narrative of why this might be necessary and what some of the goals might be. I'm literally hot off the press, and I've not had a chance to share it with him, so I will. I know his plan was to, I think, to bring it to you.
Right.
And I think he has a meeting tomorrow morning, maybe a
Right.
follow-up
Yep.
with people from SHPO
Yep.
to discuss, things like, our law is based on a model law that existed from 1978 from SHPO,
Right.
and the model law has been updated twice since, most recently in 2014, and we're simply missing some things that they now recommend. About half of what they now recommend would have no additional burden to
Right.
people in the village. It just provides greater clarity, and the other half would be an additional burden.
Right.
So we don't have to adopt them. SHPO doesn't require it, but it's a model law for us to consider.
Rob, where is the board now? Because you are the Board of Historic Preservation. Where do you guys lie in terms of, do we expand, do we overlay? What do you guys feel?
We just began the conversation, and what we did was we asked Zach Studenroth to go back and look at his last update, which is now, I want to say, 5 years old. I think it was 2015 or so, where he reviewed the inventory, made some recommendations at that time that the number of contributing structures could be increased from about 450 to about 900 based on his criteria. So nearly a doubling of those structures by both combination of expansion and landmarking. We asked him to go back and review that with any additional comments and recommendations and come back to us for, I think what we'll have is some private discussion one-on-one on the board, but then one or two, public hearings to try to get some input on this. And I think the idea was then maybe to come and sit down with you in a meeting and discuss what we've heard and get some common guidance as to ways to go. So the answer is we're not anywhere. We have the authority right now to do additional landmarking and to do additional expansion of the historic district. I know there was a property partially torn down recently, somewhat controversially in the eyes of many people. We've gotten individually, I think people have gotten a lot of feedback on that. And the question was, why didn't you landmark it? And the answer is we should be maybe regularly,
once a quarter or as needed, but a couple times a year, reviewing a prioritized list of resources in the village for considering landmarking. The ARB hasn't done that ever historically. When it tried to do a large swath and expansion in Lewis Street District, that met some resistance, and I won't go through the whole history. I don't know all of it, but I know enough of it to be dangerous. But it was basically rejected. What we did do was add that annex to the historic register listing, but it was never formally adopted as a historic district in the village because of some of the resistance. I think times have changed and some attitudes have changed for the positive in support of expansion. On the other hand, I also think that the general view of property rights and sense of entitlement among property owners, and perhaps even fear of what the burden of landmarking your historic district means that I think a lot of people support the concept as long as it doesn't affect them. So we need to understand where that balance is, and our dialogue that we started on Monday is meant to try to suss some of that out. And this is where Zach Studenroth's idea of maybe an overlay district that gets some of the key protections or opportunities to slow a process down, or at least have a public inquiry on something, and some opportunity for at least guidance and consultative input, if not legislative prohibition, to get that in place. And I think, my guess is we're talking about a 6 to 12 month process in partnership with.
The reason why I ask is because we, as a body, we voted to recommend the trustees to move the date to 1927 to 1940, I believe. We did vote on that, did we not?
Correct.
So.
And have they taken it up?
No.
They have not.
No.
Okay.
No.
That's why I'm asking.
Which is another way to do it, is to
Yeah.
change the date.
But I think the town also has some very good regulations when it comes to historic districts.
Right, the town's done a
And I
lot of
think
work.
that we should maybe coordinate and work together.
Yeah.
I think that I think with the town, any demolition permit needs to be reviewed prior by the historic district.
Right.
And I think maybe we should do that also, that any demolition permit should have some kind of review and not be allowed just by the building department.
I should also make it clear, I'm not here officially from the
Right,
ARB,
right.
and I'm not trying to speak on their
Right,
behalf.
right.
My impression, Joe, as one member of the board, is that it's why I brought the topic up, was to get the ball rolling,
Right.
but we're still at the top of the hill, pushing the pebble to get it to roll itself downhill over some period of time.
Right.
And there'll need to be input to
Right.
our board, there'll need to be input to your board, your commission,
Right.
and then there'll need to be a recommendation. For certain things, actually, there's nothing more than just procedural changes in the
Yeah.
building department.
Yeah.
There's some things they can do, but that should be done in a way that's coordinated
Right.
with larger issues that may require public hearings and could require a change in
Right.
code, which is
Right.
a larger process.
And one thing that has been happening is the historic district regulations are more available now. The building department's been really good about making sure people are aware of them.
Yep.
They're doing much more extensive reviews, so they've really stepped up and really trying to, respond to all of this, and that's helped a lot. And there's also been, I would say, really in the last few years, much better coordination between the boards, which were for many years acting as silos and not talking to each other. So that's improved.
We dealt on Monday with an issue for a property that was subdivided with an approval from the planning board, I want to say 15 or 20 years ago. That subdivision approval, there was no access to the property unless a structure on the property was moved or demolished. And it's in the historic district. And so, for instance, in my opinion, that planning board approval should never have happened without consultation from or approval from the Architectural Review Board. We're now the homeowner's stuck in this position where they think they've got they do have a subdivided property, but there's a series of not good choices right now. One of Eldon's thoughts that I don't want to speak for him, but that he shared with me, and I know he's interested in, and some municipalities do, is to have either a plan examiner coordinator position or a village or municipal architect position, where plans that come in, or an applicant who wants to make plans can come in pretty early in the process, as early as they want, with plans, consult with them, and get some guidance both on the architecture and the plans, but also on the process.
Right.
And where coordination is needed,
Right.
you can get a customized
Right.
coordination plan from the boards.
Right.
You know, in some cases, it makes sense to go to the ZBA first. In other
Right.
cases, it probably makes sense to go to the ARB first, at least for a
Right.
preliminary review. So that's one way that other municipalities handle
Right.
that issue of coordination, is to
Yeah.
have one person.
Right.
And the building department does that to some extent,
Right.
but it's sort of a different position for what the building department is currently staffed for.
Right, and I think the other thought Eldon had, which we've talked about for a while, is also making, if there's someone in that sort of position, is creating some documentation that's helpful to the boards. So the boards have more guidance at the beginning of the process with someone with some expertise about what they should be looking at. So,
Yeah, I think it's a
Okay.
very good suggestion.
yeah.
And also in terms of dynamics, on how it works and the relationship between the building department and the builders, and it would be a very good idea to have a third person
Right.
coordinate the efforts between the builder and the boards and the building department.
Okay. Any other business? We're back on a regular schedule next month, and
Yes.
hopefully for the future. Anything else?
I'm good.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.